hey, if a pro tennis player called you and was like, hey, Mike, you know what? I need you to be my guy. It's going to be, 30 weeks of travel per year. And by the way, I want you to be my physio too. So I need you to go to massage therapy school and become a great manual therapist. You're like, I don't have time to go to school for 6 months, do 1,500 hours of massage, and then leave my family for half the year. It's just not appealing. So you have to be willing to say no to a lot of stuff if you want to be very kind of specialized and nuanced in one place. And I decided to do that early in my career, and I really haven't looked back.
Hello, and welcome to the Physical Preparation Podcast. I am your host, Mike Robertson, and I'll be joined on the line later today by the one, the only, Eric Cressey. Now, before we jump into this week's episode, I want to give you a very brief recap of what is new in my neck of the woods, what's going on, and just give you a little update as to what's going on in life. So things are wrapping up, for lack of a better term, at IFAST with my off-season training. A lot of my college kids have already taken off, said goodbye to a couple more last week. My guy Larry Austin is heading home. Hopefully he gets a contract locked in for some overseas basketball very soon. My girl Ashley Prangy is actually transferring from OSU to Auburn. So very excited to watch her play some softball in this upcoming year. So it's weird. I go from, 10, 12, 15 athletes down to like 2 or 3. So the next couple weeks, I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. I still got a handful, but I know, very quickly things are wrapping up and I'm going to be pretty bored here in a couple weeks. So got them finishing up. Luckily, that gives me a little bit more time to emphasize my soccer coaching prowess. As I mentioned last week, I'm coaching both kiddos. It's been a lot of fun so far. Definitely different dynamics. You got 1st and 2nd grade boys twice a week, and then I got 5th and 6th grade girls 2 other nights of the week. So it's definitely 2 totally different dynamics. One is kind of like herding a bunch of wild cats. The other is kind of managing moods and personalities and all of that fun stuff. But kind of felt like young Pep Guardiola this weekend, or Jurgen Klopp. Both of the teams won. So that felt really good. Cade's team, I don't know. It's little kids, so I don't even really keep track. I just know that they won. And our girls won, I think 6-3, which was pretty exciting because if you would have asked myself or Jess, because I was vending to her on Thursday night, we did not have a good practice. And I was telling her, I don't know how we're going to score goals. I don't think we're going to be good. And then we went out on Saturday and just crushed. Like, the girls played amazing, great spacing, great passing, very unselfish. Just all in all, it was an awesome day. So I told the kids that morning, it was like sunny, it was like 75, no humidity. It was the best day we've had in a couple weeks here. And I just said, the soccer gods are shining down on us. So it felt good, but like anything in life, try not to get too high, too low, and we'll see what this week brings us. But definitely a good week to the soccer season. Saturday night was capped off with a date with my amazing bride. We celebrated 17 years of marital bliss, or as she probably likes to think of it, 17 years of putting up with me. But man, it was just really nice. Got to go out, have a nice dinner, enjoyed some time together. I don't know about you, but if there is a significant other and or kids in your life, especially now, it's just hard. It feels like a little bit harder to go out. It feels like it's a little bit harder to find a sitter. It's harder to carve out some of that time. So it was just really nice to get out, enjoy that time together, had an amazing dinner downtown, and just to reconnect. So that was great. And then the last thing that I kind of have written down on my topics or agenda list is there's some big things coming down the pipeline for IFAST. Really excited about some things that we're getting ready to work on. And I can't fully divulge all of the things right now, but definitely some big moves coming on our part. And as those get closer, I will definitely keep you informed. But lots of good stuff going on in my neck of the woods. I'm going to take a quick break here, and then I'm going to stop rambling because this episode with Eric is awesome, and I think you're going to love it. So, quick break, and then we're going to jump into this episode. One thing Bill Hartman and I have talked about for years now is the power of mentorship. Early on, I didn't have a mentor to shape or guide me, or most importantly, help me find the blind spots in my own training and coaching. But luckily, after many years of trial and error, I found Bill, and my professional success exploded as a result. But the downside to the mentorship process, at least professionally, is that it can be pricey. For private mentees that I work with, it costs anywhere from $3.99 to $5.99 per month to work together. And while I know the results go far beyond that price, the fact of the matter is that just won't work for a lot of folks. So when Bill and I sat down a while back, we asked ourselves a really tough question. How can we help shape the future of the industry and truly make it great? And beyond that, how can we create amazing content yet make it affordable to virtually every trainer or coach out there? And the answer for us was simple: restart iFast University. Here's what you'll get when you become a member of iFast University. One update each month from myself and Bill. This could cover anything from improving exercise technique to writing better programs and everything in between. Twice per month Q&As, where Bill and I will personally answer your questions to help you become better at training, coaching, or even running your fitness business. A Facebook group where you'll be surrounded by like-minded trainers and coaches who are serious about getting better, and access to the iFastU archives, where you'll be able to watch literally hundreds of pieces of content from the iFast team over the years. This blend of content and Q&A is specifically designed to help make you the best trainer or coach possible. If you're interested in learning more, head on over to ifastuniversity.com to get signed on. We'd love to have you on board. Today's guest probably needs no introduction whatsoever, but just in case you've been living under a rock for about the last 20 years, here goes anyway. Eric Cressey is the co-founder and president of Cressey Sports Performance, with locations in both Massachusetts and Florida. And as if that wasn't enough, he's also the director of player health and performance for the New York Yankees. So needless to say, he's kind of a big deal. In this show, Eric and I talk a little bit of business and a whole lot about baseball. We start by talking about how in the heck he manages Cressey Sports Performance and working for the Yankees, and the power of planning that makes it all happen. We talk about the evolution of his philosophy in training baseball players, and why he shifted, at least to some degree, away from pure strength development. And last but not least, we talk about why so many youth baseball players are broken, and the 3 things he would do right now, today, to keep more kids healthy and on the field. This was such a great conversation, not only because I've known Eric for so long, but because there's palpable humility and growth that I can hear in his answers, so that's really cool as well. But enough for me, let's do this. Eric, man, thanks so much for coming on the show here today. Really excited to catch up with you. It's been a minute. Start by just telling us a little bit about yourself. If somebody's been living under a rock for like 20 years, tell us who you are.
Sure thing. I think any Mike Robinson, Eric Cressey collaboration has to start with the fact that we are, in fact, 2 different people. for many years, whether it was editors or people sending random emails to ask about shoulder and knee pain that thought we were the same person. So yes. Mike is, in fact, in Indiana. I am in Florida / Massachusetts. So yeah, briefly, basically, I co-founded a facility called Cressey Sports Performance in Massachusetts in 2007. We opened up in Florida. We're in Palm Beach Gardens now. That was back in 2014. So 2 facilities in 2 states, catering largely to a baseball population. Work in the private sector led to some opportunities in professional baseball as well. So I consulted for the Minnesota Twins in 2018, 2019, and then in December of 2019 signed on with the New York Yankees as their director of player health and performance. Do some writing, speaking, consulting, when the world allows us to go out and do fun things like that.
Right.
And then also a husband as well as a father of 3 daughters. So I think that's my 15-second elevator pitch.
Oh my gosh, dude. Yeah. The epitome of having your plate full is you right now.
You're not kidding.
That's awesome, man. So obviously you and I go way back, and you've been on the show a handful of times. Yeah. So what's new in your neck of the woods, man? Since the last time we caught up, what have you added to that plate?
Yeah, I got to think about were we 2018 or 19? When was that?
I think it wasn't last year. It wasn't the COVID year, but
it was definitely pre-COVID. So yeah, the world's a little bit different since then. So yeah, that was to be honest, that's when I transitioned from a consultant role in Minnesota and then moved on to the Yankees in a much more involved role than I've been previously, with a lot more travel, a lot more responsibilities. So I kind of had dipped my feet in the shallow end of working in professional baseball and realized it was something that was fun to me. I wanted to jump in with a cannonball in the deep end. I think one of the things I learned all the way back in 2015, I was fortunate to be the strength and conditioning coach for the Team USA 1800 national team. So we traveled, for a block of time in that summer to Japan and won a gold medal. And, it's interesting. That was, there were, I don't know, 9 or 10 first round draft picks on that team. 3 of those kids are already in the big leagues now. And I look back on that as a really formative experience for me for a couple of reasons. One, I love the fact that I didn't have to be the smartest guy in the room. I think one of the things happens in entrepreneurship, especially when you put your name on the facility, which I kind of regret doing. You're always expected to have the answers. You're always expected to make the hard decisions. And you have to really constantly check yourself to pull back and be part of that team and not go rogue. And, I've learned to do that, I think, well in entrepreneurship, but in the USA baseball experience, it was very cool to, it was above all else about humility. I mean, I was making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for 17-year-old athletes. I was catching bullpens. I was doing whatever I needed to do to help that team win. And I loved it. So I kind of, in that moment when I got back from Asia, with a gold medal and a cool experience under my belt, I talked to my wife about, hey, I've had these opportunities come up in pro baseball. I'm going to take them a little bit more seriously. And so I had turned a lot of them down over the years and not really gone past the initial stages of discussion. And so that, those discussions really started to happen actually more so in 2016, 2017. And sure enough, they wound up becoming a consulting agreement and, it moved on to an actual employee scenario. So I think it was good for me because it made me realize I wanted to be meticulously involved in whether a team won or lost. I wanted to be part of, building out something that was, bigger than I was, much like the facilities like that. And I think also, anytime you're self-employed, I'm sure you appreciate this too. You almost wonder if you're employable. You know what I mean?
I know I'm not. I'm not.
You don't want to just have so much autonomy that you have no idea. And so I tested the waters with that. And I'd like to think I'm actually a very good employee as well. But, my role in the Yankees organization is a little bit of a hybrid. I'm still a director position, so I have to lead others, but I also have people to whom I report directly. So it's kind of a nice blend of the two.
Yeah, no, I love that, man. I actually want to jump ahead because I kind of saved this for last, but I think this would make for a perfect segue. Like, obviously you've got the Yankees gig. You still have CSP, 2 locations, 2 states, as you alluded to. Like, how do you balance that work and how do you find time? Because both of these are high level positions, right? It's not like you've got like a side hustle where you're doing something a couple hours a day. Like, these are 2 high level positions. How do you find a way to balance that?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is it's all heavily predicated on having really, really wonderful people in my life. First and foremost is my wife, Anna, who is an absolute rock star. And she's an optometrist with a practice in Massachusetts, but she also is our business director at the facility in Florida. So she manages, the chaos of a very busy facility, particularly in the era of COVID, where kind of everyone flocked to Florida with a lot of different revenue centers and, a large staff that expands seemingly daily, and she obviously orchestrates a ton on the home front, both the moves back and forth between Florida and Massachusetts and all that. So it is, to some degree, a moving target. This was really made possible above all else by my business partner, Pete, and then our director of performance, John O'Neill, at our Massachusetts facility. When I decided to do this, I knew that the Yankees' responsibility, during the season would really cut into my time in Massachusetts, my availability here. And, it was made possible because those guys have done such a good job of building out really a well-oiled machine that works when I'm not here, because I'm typically, our split is 7 months, 5 months, where we'll go, October 1st all the way up until the beginning of May down in Florida, and then spend, summers up here. That probably even gets shorter moving forward as our daughters, advance in school, where we don't want to put them in late and take them out early.
Right.
But, for all intents and purposes, we make sure that we structure Massachusetts so that it could run completely without me. And then my job is to come in and collaborate with Pete on, strategic initiatives for the brand, to kind of be a little bit more of maybe a figurehead, do a lot more teaching, be available for, consultations from out of town and really hard cases. So more of my roles here are just different. It's not just hey, you need to coach from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. today. It's more like, hey, here are the things that we have for you. But when stuff's not scheduled, like by all means, go to New York, do your thing there, travel with the team, be available. So we just, we're recording this here on August 12th. I was pretty much off for a week, in the end of July and early August, because I traveled down to check on our Florida facility and then, met the team while they were on the road. And, we had the trade deadline. So that was kind of an all hands on deck scenario. So it just, it takes a lot of planning, but I'm always reminded, I think it was Randy Zuckerberg, who once said, she said, family, friends, fitness, career, sleep, pick 3. And I remember reading it many, many years ago, and it was an eye-opening thing for me, because I'm like, I'm doing this by accident. Obviously it was, fitness, it was family, and really, I guess career is obviously the third one of it. But I found that I was kind of getting 3.5, because most of my social acquaintances are people who are involved in my career, right? They're, you and I texting back and forth on how our families are doing, or, we're good friends with a lot of baseball players and their families, and I don't sleep well. So it kind of, as I look at it, I was like, I'm chipping away at 3.5, but I just don't have like this huge network of like, old high school buddies and things like that, where we go out of town, go on golfing trips or anything like that. And I don't, I don't mean that disparagingly. They're wonderful people and stuff, but I just, we found our social kind of outlets somewhere else. And a lot of them come through our family time, dropping the kids off at school and stuff too. So I think it just comes down to really meticulous planning and honestly saying no in a lot of ways. Like, I look at you, you've built out like this amazing presence in the basketball and the soccer world. But hey, if a pro tennis player called you and was like, hey, Mike, you know what? I need you to be my guy. It's going to be, 30 weeks of travel per year. And by the way, I want you to be my physio too. So I need you to go to massage therapy school and become a great manual therapist. You're like, I don't have time to go to school for 6 months, do 1,500 hours of massage, and then leave my family for half the year. It's just not appealing. So you have to be willing to say no to a lot of stuff if you want to be very kind of specialized and nuanced in one place. And I decided to do that early in my career, and I really haven't looked back.
Yeah, I love it, man. Okay, so I like to talk training with you, and especially in the sense of, how your philosophy has changed. Because again, I think this is the 4th time you've been on the show, and I love diving in and learning more about like, hey, like you're 20 years in now, right? Like what have you changed, or what has evolved about your training philosophy in the last couple of years? Yeah,
for sure. I think, we joke, if you don't look back at programs you wrote 5 years ago and do a face palm, you're probably not growing the way that you should. I'd say the biggest place where I can describe our training as improving is on the synergy side of things. So, here we are, we're 2021 having this discussion. Really around 2010 was when we brought a pitching coordinator into our facility. It was Matt Blake, who's now our pitching coach in the big leagues of the Yankees. So if you look at kind of how our pitching coaches have been like almost like a grooming ground for professional coaches, right? So Matt was first, he's now with the Yankees. Christian was second, he's now with the Padres. Kyle Driscoll was third, he's now with the Mets. Kevin McAvoy was his assistant, he's now with the Braves. Jordan is next, and I don't know who's going to try to poach Jordan next. They'll probably listen to this and steal him tomorrow. But you have this path, and so I think early on, I was an outsider to baseball, right? I played up until 8th grade. I was a better tennis player. I was a third baseman, so I didn't really speak the pitching language. Like if you would ask me in 2007 how to hold a four-seam fastball or something like that, I wouldn't have been able to show it the way that I can now. So I had to do a lot more listening, ask a lot more questions. And I think early on we had a lot of success because being an outsider was an advantage, because you didn't take stupid things, for granted. Just because we always did it wasn't a good enough, reason for me. So, that was in the context of, hey, we're not going to distance run guys. Hey, it's not just lift heavy stuff on the football program or do the foo-foo rehab program. Hey, there's something in the middle. I got exposed more and more to people, and, we built out this, kind of advanced med ball progression. Things just kind of evolved over the years, but I think you stagnate after a while. And we had to do it on our own. The internet wasn't there where you couldn't go and read the, 500 articles I've written on baseball strength and conditioning like they are now. And you couldn't go through an intern where, I look around the industry now and there's probably 30 former interns who have facilities that, indirectly compete with us, even though we love those people.
Right.
So things have changed, but around 2010, 2011, when Matt came in, he's a guy who was a college pitcher who had a really keen eye. He'd gotten involved with video analysis. Right View Pro was kind of the name of the game. This was before you could do slow-mo iPhones. This was before, Edgertronic cameras had changed the game. And Matt really, whether he realized it at the time or not, challenged me to think of things in a more synergistic way. Is, how do we relate what we're doing from our assessment standpoint, from our training standpoint, to what we are ultimately trying to achieve on the mound, and then obviously hitting, fielding, running, whatever it may be. And I think, early on we had to find our way with it. And I think that's where when I look around the injury industry right now, there are a lot of people who say they're doing baseball specific training, and they're where we were in 2010, 2011. They're trying to find their way. They don't see it. They don't understand how, osteokinematics are different than arthrokinematics. They think that if you just lift heavy and throw weighted balls, it's going to work. Right. And I just realized that, we could do it better. And I've taken my licks, and I look back, and there were athletes that I'm like, man, if we had access to, Rapsodo or TrackMan circa 2012, I could have changed this guy's career. Like, he could have learned this slider faster. We could have picked up on the fact that, his arm action was inverted at weight bearing foot strike, and there was no way he was ever going to throw a breaking ball for a strike from that position. But the technology has improved so much. Are really, really deep dive by the Yankees role, because we have amazingly brilliant analysts and coaches who are skilled not just in the context of interpreting a lot of this information, but also building sample sizes out. We have guys who can manage the data. We have people who are skilled in motor learning stuff and all that. So I've been able to learn a lot more about the game on a very microscopic level. And it's what it's done above all else. It's made me a better coach from a programming standpoint, but just as importantly, I can create context for athletes a lot easier, whether that's in describing the positions that they need to get to in their sporting demands, or even in just, speaking to things that they struggle to do. Here's the movement issue that is making it harder for you to throw a glove side fastball. So I think those are the places where we've gotten better and better. And certainly along the way, we've been exposed. I mean, a lot of Bill's stuff has been incredibly impactful with just looking at wide versus narrow infrasternal angles, and, appreciating that, a lot of those guys that we were struggling to, either preserve or improve range of motion with, we were taking guys that were out of alignment, what I mean? Or we were taking a hammer to a problem that needed a screwdriver, so I think that has changed. And I think maybe, even building on that just a little bit more, I think we're lifting guys less now than we ever have before. And that's not necessarily that we're not training. We're just training differently.
Yep.
We're recognizing that maybe you don't need to be as strong as we initially thought you needed to be, that it's a lot harder to build a premier level of elasticity via both the contractile and non-contractile elements. So obviously musculotendinous units, and then also the fascial system. It takes a lot of reps. And I think that's, probably one reason why early sports specialization is inherently at odds with, creating athletes who are conditioned long-term to perform at a high level. So we've made adjustments in that capacity. We train rotation way more and way harder than we ever have before. And a lot of that volume has been shifted away from just lifting heavy stuff and bilateral work and assuming that a 500-pound deadlift was going to get you throwing 95. And instead, attacking things just by other mediums with med balls and using the Proteus and all that stuff.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. So this kind of, again, streamlines into my next question, because you and I were texting before the show, and you mentioned that, with all this quote unquote baseball specific training, there's lots of new injury trends in the game, and sports med is honestly just trying to do its best to keep up. So I obviously don't follow the game, at least baseball, to the same degree that you do. So would you mind elaborating on that just a little bit more?
Yeah. And this is really multifactorial. I think you have to appreciate baseball across all levels to understand what's really happening, right? So at the youngest ages, there's more specialization happening.
Yep. So a
lot of these structural deviations from normalcy are becoming part of adolescent development, right? So we're seeing UCL injuries in 13 and 14-year-old kids when that was unheard of. Maybe you'd see some growth plate injuries, but now we're seeing ligamentous stuff, So, when I look at pre-draft MRIs before the image draft, there's no such thing as a normal elbow anymore. Everybody's got something going on. And we have actually research that shows, like, if you compare like a Japanese, study of 12-year-old elbows in the baseball world compared to American one, the Japanese elbows are substantially worse. So this isn't just like, hey, everybody's got this. The kids who throw the most are the most likely to break. So there's actually research that demonstrates that this isn't just like an incidental finding, where if you looked at like patellar tendons and all your basketball guys, you're going to see a bunch of tendinopathy that's not symptomatic. So that's the first challenge, is that kids are broken before they ever get to Major League Baseball. The second thing is that, the outcome measures are inherently objective now. You hit the ball hard, so exit velocity, or you throw the ball hard, pitching velocity. And there's a few different things that contribute to that. One, we have better video analysis, so we can optimize technique much better. The coaching is inherently improved to, random versus block practice, just understanding what actually makes pitchers throw harder and hitters, have insane exit velocities. Right. So those numbers are going sky high. We have a crazy amount of, intent. Sometimes it's without direction. There's more on that in a second, but as we go to these higher levels, the harder you throw, it's really just a physics equation, right? You're more likely to get hurt if you throw harder. Average fastball velocity has gone up substantially over the course of time. And player body weight actually went up really for 2 decades during the steroid era. We saw, the average major leaguer, I want to say, went up like 12% in body weight. And what was interesting is during that time period, there were a lot of bad things in the game, right? There were amphetamines, there were performance enhancing drugs, all of those. A lot of those things were the things that helped players get out on the field, even when they were hurt. Yeah. And the game has been cleaned up, and the players have found a way to be bigger and stronger, but they've done it without that stuff. And that's, some of the stuff that I think gets overlooked with respect to some of the injuries that take place, for sure. I think, at the college level, it's all about winning, especially now that, college coaches are being paid in the baseball world better than ever before. And that the professional level, the game is more specialized, right? You see guys that are there to hit home runs or strike out. And then on the pitching side, you see guys they're there to go out and throw 102 for an inning, as opposed to having to be like 90 to 93 for 6 innings or 7 innings. It's just that the stresses have changed so dramatically over the course of time. And like you implied earlier, sports medicine hasn't been able to keep up. So we're certainly seeing more injuries. And a big part of that is, that we need to, figure out ways to not have people broken in the first place, but also manage them in the long term. But I think we also need to realize that sometimes it's better diagnostics. Like, 10 years ago, there were a lot of doctors that didn't believe thoracic outlet syndrome existed. And now that's universally accepted in all 30 major league organizations. And, the couple of, people in the country you want to refer a thrower to if they have it. So we're diagnosing things better, but we're also seeing the same patterns actually becoming different kinds of injuries, right? So, Jake Peavy avulsed his lat off of his humerus in, it was 2010 or 11, whatever it was, in Chicago. Dr. Romeo basically had to invent a surgery to reattach it. I remember that. And it was interesting, 2015, I saw the 17th one he had done. It was a high school pitcher in Massachusetts, college pitcher in Massachusetts. And now I see 2 or 3 a year. Like very, very common. My gosh. Just because guys are throwing so much harder. You're seeing Terry's major injuries, which is kind of a mini lat. We're seeing anterior dislocations in throwers with guys. Typically, it's a baseball player who's very loose, that starts up on an aggressive weighted ball program and acquires a lot of extra rotation really fast. And instead of just having a cuff issue or, like an anterior capsule or something like that, they actually wound up with a Bankart injury, which in the past was like a fall on an outstretched arm. It was rugby. It was something crazy. Right. I've seen a couple of those. I've seen lat repairs where the humeral shaft fractured, where some of the screws were put in to reattach. So what we're seeing is new surgeries invented, and then we're seeing new surgeries to correct the complications from the initial surgeries. Baseball is in a very strange place, and the advances are good. We're seeing a UCL repair with internal brace. Certain ligament injuries are doing better with a bracing instead of an altogether reconstruction. Dr. Jeff Dugas, at Andrews Clinic, really, pioneered that approach based on a procedure in Scottish, a Scottish doctor had invented for ankles, and now they're using it in throwing elbows. So it's just a really crazy time where we're seeing a lot of new stuff. One curious trend right now as well, that injuries are up pretty dramatically in baseball, largely in part because of, kind of the lack of oversight and training that took place for that, year and a half during the pandemic, where, players weren't necessarily allowed into facilities, and, they were all over the place and not necessarily getting a lot of attention. But believe it or not, wrist, hand, finger, thumb issues in Major League Baseball are going sky high this year, highest they've ever been in history. And part of it's because it's two-pronged. One, more and more guys are throwing incredibly hard, which means they have less command, which means more guys than ever are being hit by pitches. And partway through the year, we saw Major League Baseball doing a crackdown on the sticky substances. So players who were throwing hard, he had even less command. So we're probably expecting to see even more hit by pitches. So, now we're looking at probably having to advance our knowledge of wrist and hand and finger stuff, just because the game is always evolving and sports medicine is trying to keep up. So there's a lot of work there, isn't there?
That's crazy, man. That's crazy. And, you and I are both parents, and you kind of alluded to, we have to address this at each level, right? We can't just look at the pros and say, oh, well, this is the problem. Like, you got to start at the bottom. And you and I both have kids. Our kids are getting involved in sports. And I'd love to know, like, your perspective, right? Because I obviously have thoughts, but I'd love to hear your thoughts in the world of baseball and how we can better develop these youth kids so they don't have some of this stuff going on.
Yeah, I think step one is you do have to appreciate that baseball is different. You know what I mean? Like in little kids, you're going to see, ACLs and, 15-year-olds. They're going to happen periodically.
Right. They're
not going to happen as often as you see growth plate injuries in baseball throwers. And, the reason is very simple. Throwing a baseball is the single fastest motion in all of sports. The stress on the shoulder and the elbow are sky high compared to anything you encounter, in almost any other youth sport. So we do have to protect kids from that. So I do think, taking times off throughout the year, listening to, subjective feedback from kids of when things are barking up, kind of listen when it whispers instead of waiting for it to yell. I think that's vitally important. But I think just as important, there's a little bit of like a finding a happy medium, right? On one hand, you want to play baseball because you actually have adaptations you need to develop, not just in terms of motor competencies, being able to do the things you need to be successful in the sport, but we actually do need to develop retroversion in a proximal humerus to allow for more external rotation during, the layback phase of throwing. That's vitally important. And if you don't have it, you're probably never going to throw a baseball at a high level down the road. But I think the other end of the spectrum, we need to give them breaks from this so that, it doesn't become pathology, but also we have time to develop all these competencies that build this really broad foundation, of motor potential, right? Of, adjustability to, unpredictable scenarios. And it was interesting. I was talking to Jose Trevino on my podcast. Jose is a catcher for the Texas Rangers in the big leagues. And what was interesting, he actually led the state of Texas in home runs. He set the all-time record with 25 home runs his senior year. He was a shortstop and a third baseman. And he went to college and they started to transition him to a catcher. They were, his build is such that he was very well equipped for it. And he struggled a lot in college. And then the Rangers drafted him. He was still playing multiple positions. 2014, they made him a full-time catcher. 2017, he was named the organization's best catcher. And now he's a big leaguer. And I was talking to him, I was like, what allowed you to do this? It is so hard to be elite at two positions in the big leagues. And if you look at the guys that did it, like they were usually like, hey, I was a shortstop, my arm wasn't good enough, so I went to second base,
right?
That kind of thing. Or, hey, I was a second baseman, I was pretty fast, they put me in center field. He went from shortstop and third base to catching, and catching is an incredibly hard position.
Yeah.
You have to block, you have to throw, you have to receive, you have to game call. Oh yeah, you have to go hit, you have to run the bases, you got to back up first base, you got to nurture these relationships with pitchers from all walks of life. It's the hardest position because you have to constantly serve everybody else. And I asked him, like, what was it? And he's like, I was a multi-sport kid in high school. I was football all the way through. I was basketball until the end of my sophomore year. I was always around different things. He was competing. And then even when he got to college, the reps you get at third base versus shortstop versus catcher, he kind of played three positions all through college.
Wow.
And so when it came time to actually learn one specific position, he was super well equipped for it. And he wasn't broken, because he hadn't just done the same thing over and over again. And I saw a kid for an evaluation yesterday, a 15-year-old kid, left-handed pitcher, really good arm, lots of potential. And he told me he was a pitcher only. I was like, hold on, we're stopping right here. Like if you need to at least go to batting practice. You need to go out and shag fly balls in the outfield. You need to play pickup hoops with your buddy, ultimate frisbee, whatever it is, because at 15, you will not be the athlete you can be if you're only pitching.
Yes. We actually saw this with one or two guys that came to IFAST over the years where they got drafted early, only pitched, and you saw this over the course of years, this progressive loss in athleticism, right? And then maybe somebody decides, oh, well, I don't think they've got the command, or they don't have the juice, or they're just not what we thought they were, and they try and convert back and they can't do it.
Yeah. You can't make up that time. So think about your kids, right? They're soccer, they're basketball. I can't remember the study, but it was something like 2,200 changes of direction for a midfielder in the average soccer game. I remember hearing that back in like grad school, and I'm not sure if it's even accurate. And you think about that's close. Part of, and no two changes of direction are the same. Yep. That is like the most rich proprioceptive environment imaginable. And it's a constant stimulus to the fascial system to adapt and give you adjustability. And it's perfectly complemented by strength training, right? You're bringing you're challenging the stiffness of the tendons with all that work. You throw some strength stuff in there to make the muscles stronger. And you have this like amazing seesaw that's always in balance.
Yep.
You can't get that if you skip soccer and just go to the gym and do, 3 sets of 15 yards, high knee skips. Like it just doesn't happen. It's very closed loop. It's the same thing over and over again. And I look at our big league guys, so many of our guys were not like elite seniors in high school. They were guys that got to college and figured it out a little bit later. They played multiple sports. They did all these things. So few guys that were like the best players in like little league and middle school become big leaguers. And I think it's because their focus gets too narrow. But, a starting pitcher, like I deal with this on a 5-day rotation, even a 7-day rotation in college. You got to go out of your way to find athleticism for them, because yes, it's super stressful to go out and make 100 pitches and, throw 6 innings and, field your position, cover first base, whatever it is. But like, that's 4 days where there's not necessarily like a crazy stimulus, that's going to keep you well-rounded in athletics. We try to integrate that in our strength work and our movement competency stuff with, change of direction drills, let them throw the football, do whatever we need to do to keep them, athletic.
Right. I love that, man. So obviously well-known. I mean, you maybe weren't the first to being baseball specific, but man, you changed the game in that world, and CSP has really changed that whole landscape. Now, with that being said, talk to me a little bit about this state of so-called baseball-specific training, because like all good things, there's probably this bell curve, right? Like it hit really well for a while, and now I think you're seeing a deterioration. And maybe that's just me, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think the problem, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think you have a lot of former players that are getting into strength conditioning.
Yep.
So they understand how the game is played. But you think about what we're all doing, whether you're working with soccer and basketball guys, I'm working with baseball players or our tennis guys or whatever it is, football quarterbacks, we're all chasing adaptation, right?
Yep.
And that's adaptation, either optimize performance or reduce the risk of injury during performance or in the preparation for it. And adaptation is going to be dependent on a lot of things, right? It's dependent on musculoskeletal adaptations, probably the fascial system that overlays it, which could probably fall into that same umbrella. It's dependent on physiological adaptations, right? Things like, aerobic competencies and energy system development. And then, there's certainly going to be a neuromuscular component. How do we develop the nervous system to, effectively communicate with those other systems? And then last but not least, there's a technical proficiency aspect of it, right? It's, how do you manipulate the baseball when you throw a curveball, or, are you, messy with your footwork, or are you Eric Cressey who hasn't kicked a soccer ball in 15 years? Like they're right. Very different things, right? And I just think that gets overlooked. You shouldn't be writing programs unless you understand all 4 of those systems in some capacity. And there are many other systems that we probably don't even speak to, right? That didn't even speak to like optimal motor learning strategies and how you coach, which would certainly impact how the brain communicates. So I just think that gets really, really overlooked right now, because people they have more accessibility than ever before to sexy training initiatives, right? You can go on Twitter and see cool velocity-based training protocols, or you can go and, find the latest, greatest weighted ball program on YouTube. And, you can get a hand-me-down program from someone who's at college, even though you're a 14-year-old kid, you're not ready for it. And we just see this so commonly. I'll say it's getting better. There's more college strength addition coaches that are doing just baseball. I just don't see a whole lot of people out there that really fundamentally understand the unique characteristics and adaptations that we're seeing in the baseball world. So many of these guys are successful because they got long middle fingers, crazy hypermobility, and know how to manipulate a baseball. And folks are saying that they need to squat 500 and do a magical weighted ball program to get where they need to be. We've used weighted balls in some capacity since 2007. They're a piece of the puzzle, but really they're one method where the application is what matters. And the application is one piece of a very large puzzle. So, what do I think people need to do to remedy this? I think you need to learn your anatomy. I think you need to understand why we see growth plate injuries, the proximal humerus in 13-year-old players, but we don't see them in, soccer players. Yeah. You need to also understand physiological adaptations so that when you prescribe sprinting or distance running or whatever it is you give to people, that you understand specifically what you're trying to actually achieve with them. You need to understand how to coach. You understand why most of the time external focus cues are going to be your play, but sometimes for arm care, I really love internal focus cues, and there's absolutely a place for what we're trying to actually take care of. And then last but not least, you got to understand the fundamental demands of the sport. Yep. I think everybody on the planet thinks they have all the solutions for people they've never met, and we have to understand that there are dynamics in play that the average fan doesn't necessarily know about. So they may be working from kind of a false set of pretenses.
Yeah. I remember something you put, it was either on Twitter or Instagram a while back, but like, hey, when you're heckling that baseball player out there, yeah, he's one of like 20,000 guys that's ever played professional baseball ever. Yeah. So just cool your jets, guy. Like you're not as awesome as you'd like to think. It's
insanely hard. It's, it's funny. It's almost like people, have you ever noticed how no one ever criticizes professional golfers?
Yeah.
It's because every schmuck can go out and play golf and realize he sucks at it, right?
Right.
Like, it's really hard to be like, I'm pretty sure I could have gone first to third on that single to right field better than that pinch runner who ran last night. Like, I totally could be a third base coach and know exactly what to do at all times. Like they have no fundamental awareness of like what the game is like at the highest level. And I distinctly remember Buddy Morris talking about this. So yeah. Buddy, obviously, had experience, at Pitt. He'd been in the NFL and he came back to the NFL. And I remember talking to him at a seminar, and he was like, the average person has no idea how fast like NFL football is played unless you're on the level of the field. Like it is yes. watching car accidents nonstop as people run into yes. each other. And I'll be honest with you, the first time I ever watched Giancarlo Stanton do his tee routine, I had the same feeling. Like G hits the ball harder than anybody on the planet. He hit a ball 122, which tied his own record for the season the other day. There's maybe 5 guys on the planet who can hit a ball 120 miles an hour, and he does it effortlessly. It's just awe-inspiring for me. And so when you have those experiences up close, it's just it's a totally different set of rules, a set of stressors, set of demands. And, and I see it all the time, you see guys throwing 103 as well. They're different. So sometimes you always want to coach and help wherever you can, but sometimes you want to ask questions and listen so you can learn.
Yes. I love it, man. I love it. So coming back to this weighted ball mm-hmm. discussion, because I think it's fascinating. I remember one of our mutual athletes, I won't name the name because I don't know if he would like me to say this, but we were talking, and literally he reports to college, and the first day they started on a weighted ball program. I'm not kidding. I think it was a 16-ounce weighted ball, and one of the other kids tears his UCL. First day. Okay. So I want to go to you because like you said, you've been doing this 10, 11 years now at least. What's the role of weighted ball programming? And then maybe how and when do you think it should be incorporated into a program?
Yeah, so there's 2 elements to this. And like I said, we've used weighted balls since 2007. I was guessing at the time. I had I had an idea of what I wanted to accomplish with them, but I rolled it out in a really limited context. We had a guy, Sean Haviland, I'll always remember. Sean actually works in the front office for the Boston Red Sox now. He's retired. Yeah. And I remember 2009, Sean started up with us in the fall of 2008. He was Ivy League Pitcher of the Year at Harvard in 2008. And I remember he came in for his first evaluation. Sean was a 5'11" righty, not necessarily like a great body. And he was, 88 to 90. And I think he was a 33rd rounder that signed for, $1,000 in a plane ticket or whatever it was. And I remember talking to Sean during our battle. I'm like, 88 to 90, 5'11" righties don't stick around in this game very long unless they do something really different. I'm like, are you open to trying this? And he's like, I got nothing to lose. Let's do this. So to his credit, that offseason, he got after it, and I give him a lot of credit because this was not just like, yes, we got him long tossing. Yes, we got him throwing away balls. But he also overhauled his strength training stuff. He threw the med ball. He sprinted. He cleaned up his diet. He did a lot of different things well. And I distinctly remember, it's early to mid-February. I get a text from him. He had gone back to Harvard to throw live to, his former teammates since he was drafted. And he goes, I was 90 to 92, touching 93 today. You're really good at what you do. I'm like, all right, I guess it worked.
Right.
And I'll never forget the text because I was like, I really pulled that out of thin air just based on what I know of like physiology, how he moved, and what I hoped the response we were trying to get. And sure enough, Sean went out that year. He was like a Midwest League All-Star. He was 91 to 94, touched 95. The velo, continued beyond that. It was, for me, it was like, wow, this is something that's sustainable. This will work. And I was probably the only strength coach at the time who was writing throwing programs in the history of the planet. And I was guessing,
right.
But we got it more fine tuned. And you look at like a Corey Kluber. Corey started up with us really in not long after that. I think he was 2010, 11 off season was his first one. And Corey was to some degree a little bit of a guinea pig with it as well. He was a double-A arm right there. And sure enough, by the time Corey was in the big leagues, his velo had gone up and he felt like it made him more durable. When I looked back on it, I was seeing it as it was post-activation potentiation, right? The heavy stuff just made the light stuff go faster. So we were just looking to create contrast. And I still do believe that's a big part of what we're trying to achieve. I also thought that it probably was filling an important place on this absolute speed to absolute strength continuum, where absolute speed was throw a 5-ounce ball, absolute strength was lift heavy stuff. The strength speed stuff was med balls. So the speed strength stuff could be weighted balls. It was a specific way to train power and maybe capitalize on a certain part of that force velocity curve that we hadn't touched yet. What I didn't realize though, is that in the years that followed, there were more and more people that started to talk about like arm shaping, that using weighted balls might be something that could actually change somebody's path. Meaning they could shorten an arm action that was too deep, because the last thing you want to do is if you're throwing a 1 pound med ball or 1 pound weighted ball is get really long with your arm action. It's kind of like moving the fat kid all the way to the end of the seesaw. It just doesn't feel right. So, that became a big thing. I think it's become a little overdone. So what's really happened now, there've been a couple different things. One, people have seen results. So they've gotten more aggressive with it, right? If you can drive your car 70 miles an hour and you're a dumbass, you're going to drive at 100 miles an hour and see if you die. So there's that side of it, is that there are always going to be people that are naturally gravitated to the extremes. Second, one of the other things that we've seen an adjustment where when we were doing it, all of the balls had seams. They were baseballs that happened to have seams. Okay. And now we've gone to what they call plyo care balls. They're squishier. They tend to be easier. You can throw them against cement walls. You can throw them against, tarps, things like that. So, they still break, but they do have a little bit more durability as opposed to just like chucking a regular ball against a fence or, God forbid, a partner that has to actually try to catch it. So I think that potentially we are seeing some potential negative consequences of using that. Guys that effectively grip the ball heavier because it doesn't have a seam and it gives. So, my concern there would be guys who they forget how to like actually manipulate the baseball. So spin efficiency goes down. They throw accidental cutters. They don't get feedback from their catch partner on what the baseball is absolutely doing. So you worry about guys that are, spending 70% of their throwing volume on weighted balls. I also worry that, with all that extra gripping, are we seeing a higher incidence of flexor injuries? So I'm probably not really inclined to use those with guys who have low spin efficiency fastballs, a history of flexor issues. Again, that's very preliminary. And then the last thing is just like any implement, whether we're talking about, high-speed treadmills or, whatever you want to talk about, is if something becomes more commonplace, people are less attentive with it. When it's new and novel, they're very focused. The drills you see, I bet 75% of the kids that come to us, when we watch them do their weighted ball drills on the first day, it makes you want to throw up in your mouth. It's so bad. They're just not putting themselves in good positions to be successful. They're losing track of the why behind why they do it. So My feeling is you need to understand why you're utilizing them, have a clear understanding of it. And then I think building on that, probably just as importantly, we need to make sure we know how to use them. I think the biggest mistake people make is using them too soon. One of the things that we always do with our off-season throwing programs is I want guys playing catch with a 5-ounce baseball for 2 to 3 weeks before we do any weighted ball stuff. And the reason is really simple. If they've been shut down for a period, I want them to gradually gain back their external rotation.
Yep.
And what's really interesting is if you look at an adaptive study. So Reinhold, I think it was back in 2009, looked at major league pitchers over the course of a season. And he found the average one gains about 5 degrees of shoulder ER over the course of a season. There are going to be guys that gain 25 and guys that lose 15. So that's an average. It doesn't speak to the standard deviation. He did a follow-up study a couple of years ago that showed effectively 1 in 4 people gets hurt doing a weighted ball program. So the injury rate is pretty high. Usually they are the people that are too aggressive too soon. And what happens is they gain a lot of external rotation really quickly. So what winds up happening, their ligament gets left out to dry and they have a Tommy John, they get a lat strain, they have an anterior capsule injury, they have some kind of undersurface cuff irritation. The biggest risk factor in throwers in that world is having a lot of passive external rotation, but not having sufficient active control to really, take advantage of it. Everybody wants to fall in love with glenohumeral internal rotation deficit. You need 0 degrees of IR to throw a baseball. 0.
Right.
And I'm not saying that IR is not important. It's, as we both know, it's representative of high quality systemic movement. And if a guy walks in with 20 degrees of IR, it's probably not a great situation. But there are guys who have 40 that have thrown baseballs with $200 million contracts in the big leagues for a long time and been totally fine with it. So more important is how well do you control externally rotated position to 0 degrees than how do you control 0 to 60 or 70.
Right. That makes sense. Okay. So I'm excited for this one. It's a thought experiment.
Mm-hmm.
The gods anoint you the ruler of all baseball specific training and youth, and put youth development kind of under that motto as well, right? Mm-hmm. What changes would you make right now today to make the baseball world a little bit better?
Yeah, I think the first thing is modulating workload at the youngest ages, where kids get into trouble. Really, if we look at the research on baseball, it's actually surprising. There's only 2 things that actually predict that you'll get hurt. Like even a lot of the flexibility measures and things like that aren't great. The only 2 things that predict if you will get hurt is overuse. Do you pitch while you're fatigued? Do you go to more showcases? Do you throw more than 100 innings? So one is modulating workload. And then second, being weak. We know that pretty much every strength test of the rotator cuff predicts injuries over and over again. And don't get me wrong, there's stuff that, limited shoulder flexion increases your risk of elbow injury in professional pitchers and all that. But, those don't necessarily carry over as great with the younger levels. And even when we talk about pitching mechanics, we really don't know what healthy pitching mechanics are. We heard about the inverted W is the devil and Tommy John twist, taking the ball to center field is the devil. Research shows they aren't inherently any more stressful. Most of what we know about pitching mechanics has to do with optimizing performance and not actually keeping athletes healthy. When it comes to keeping people healthy, it's don't be weak and don't be overused. So if you can handle those 2 things at the youngest level, you're in a great situation. Part 3 to that is probably optimize pregame warmups. I know you've probably read it a million times, the FIFA 11, right? FIFA 11 was the most underwhelming warm-up in the history of strength and conditioning. It might have been, no knock to the authors, but that might have been written by a chimp. And it reduced hamstrings injuries by 60 something percent.
Yeah.
Just warming up reduces your risk of so many injuries because it's a chance to just get reps in to optimize high quality movement. So if you can get kids away from just doing the dumb arm circles and, jogging a lap of the field and actually doing something that builds some movement competency, things are going to change dramatically. And the funny thing about it is if you do those 3 things at the big league level, you're going to keep guys healthy too, right?
Yeah.
It's get them strong in the right places. The extension of that is obviously develop some elasticity in the guys that need it, and make sure that they're warming up correctly and make sure that they don't get overused. Good things happen. It's pretty consistent across all levels.
It's just so funny because you could take those same 3, and I don't have correlative studies in basketball, but overuse. Don't play 5-on-5 all summer, right? Ramp up. Don't be so weak that your joints take a pounding. actually warm up, because I can't tell you how many guys have come to me and they're like, oh, my knees are hurting today. I'm like, well, you just came off the court, right? Yeah. Well, what'd you do to warm up? Well, nothing. I just started shooting. It's like, well, come on, fellas. Like that's so simple, but I think that's carried over to basically any sport. If you know,
It,
go ahead.
it underlies this whole sports science discussion, right? Because you're in it, in an even heavier world, right? You're in the load management world of basketball and soccer, where, and that's load management. They play 2 to 3 games a week, right? The NBA is playing fewer back-to-back games than they've ever played before. Baseball, as I speak right now, we're in the middle of a 17 games in 16 days stretch. That's crazy. In baseball, you're going to play 200 games in 230 days. You're lucky if you get 2, maybe 3 off days a month. And usually what happens is you have like a drawn out rain delay where a game gets canceled. So you spend 17 hours at the ballpark and go to bed at 3 a.m. and then you have to make it up like 2 weeks later on one of your off days. So like the load in Major League Baseball is the stuff that when I talk to coaches in like outside sports, like they're blown away. It's like, I don't know how you do it.
Yeah.
Because if something is irritated, like you can't just like have 2 days to bounce back. You've got to like hit it immediately. But this load management discussion, right? There's always 2 ends of the spectrum, right? They're the people that are like, they're soft. You just need to make them stronger. You need to build a more robust athlete. And you have people at the other end of the spectrum where it's like, hey, don't exceed your acute quantic ratio, all this stuff. You have to have both perspectives, right? Because you think about the things I just described, like there's the acute preparation and warm-ups, but in reality, the get strong is build a robust athlete, and then don't compete through crazy fatigue is the load management end of the spectrum.
Yeah,
it works at all levels, but not if you're inherently attached to one end of that continuum.
No, that's awesome, man. Okay, I know we're up against the clock here, but I got my lightning round for you. So 4 questions for you. Number 1, I really want to hear this because I have a very distinct memory, but I want to know what's your favorite memory from us creating products together?
Holy cow. I'll distinctly remember this. So we filmed Magnificent Mobility, right? This is November of 2005. I come to Indianapolis. I remember we were filming it at that gymnasium in Fishers, right?
It was in Carmel, but yes, close enough.
Close. I'm pretty good. And Bill I remember Bill came by, Craig Rasmussen came by to say what's up, everything. We did all that. So that was November, right? And this is the olden days where like you couldn't just like email stuff over on Dropbox. Like you had to like literally send raw files for them to edit DVDs.
Yes.
So it took months and we went through all the revisions and everything. They were mailing DVDs for us to plug into our computer when computers actually had DVD players. And I remember you came out, I was still living in Southern Connecticut.
Yeah.
So you came out and stayed with Tony and I for a couple of days.
Yeah.
And we created our online kind of, product sales thing. It was your shopping cart. Right. So this is 2006, I think, when that product comes out. And I think you came and trained at Southside while you were there, right?
I did.
Came and got a lift in. It was probably a Friday night bench session.
Yeah.
But I distinctly remember we set this thing up and the next morning woke up and somebody in Australia had bought our DVD. And I was like, holy crap, they actually care what we have to say. So that for me was like a very eye-opening moment of like, hey, the world is your market. If you invest in yourself, you keep getting better. People actually care what you have to say. So it was, I think I'm sure you probably felt something similar in the sense that it was eye-opening that people actually wanted to hear more from us, because it's always one thing when like people on internet forums or people who read your articles, like they like it, they give you compliments because it's free.
Right.
But when you actually have people investing their hard-earned money with it, it's a big responsibility, but it's also very humbling. So absolutely. I always think back on that one.
Dude, that's crazy. But first off, great memory. And I'm thinking through this now. All I remember from that weekend is when we came and shot, I was coming off a knee surgery. Couldn't do much. So you did really all the dynamic stuff. So you basically did warm-ups for 4 hours. And it's like 5 o'clock and you're like, hey, want to get a lift? I'm like, dude, are you serious? And I just remember you going in and doing good mornings with like 365. And I was like, this guy's spine is just made out of like sheet metal or something. I don't know.
And I mean, I turned every squat I ever had in a powerlifting meet into a good morning. So it was some kind of specificity of training, I guess.
Yeah. We might have to do a show that's just memory lane because I think we could entertain people for an hour. Okay. Number 2, tell me more about this business mentorship that's coming up.
Oh, right on. Yeah. So we, Pete and I think this will be the 6th or 7th time we've had it. Started out as something we would do as like a tag on to our fall seminar. really what happened was over the years, it actually happened. We would run our baseball mentorship.
Yeah.
And invariably during the baseball mentorship, someone would like go poke their head in Pete's office and be like, hey, I really love your business model. Could you like talk to me more about it? And so the questions became like more and more consistent every time we would run it. So Pete, on the second to last day of our business mentorship, would have like a 1 hour, basically Q&A where he just like reserved the conference room in our building and then, field questions from the gym owners that were in attendance. And over the course of time, we kind of realized that this was like a curriculum we could build out. So we talk about kind of the four, pillars of running a gym. It's basically lead generation, lead conversion, retention, and systems, which are all interrelated. And, I think a lot of people, don't understand it. And what we've really done is we've recognized that, what we did in Massachusetts from 2007 to 2014 was we built a lot of systems and then we rolled a lot of them out in Florida, and some of them worked phenomenally and some of them didn't. They're just different geographic dynamics. Massachusetts is more high school and college. Florida, like 49% of our revenue yearly is professional athletes. So it's just a different world. It's a very cyclical business. So we recognize that some things were scalable and some weren't. And a lot of business, folks in the fitness space, they just want you to follow their model. And so I think we've become really good at asking questions and trying to help people figure out what's right for them. So we put this thing together and the feedback's been really good. The funny thing about it too is, so we actually bring in our accountant.
Oh, wow.
Who's awesome. He's a small business specialist. He does a 1 hour talk. And what's funny is invariably, basically the event becomes an investment and not expense just because of his talk. Anything you get from Pete and I is gravy. But we had, believe it or not, one guy who was a fitness business owner in Seattle who went through that course when we had it in Florida. And he looked into reclassifying as an S Corp instead of what he was doing. And it saved him 10 grand in the year that followed. So we got like he sent us some coffee and a thank you note from Seattle because basically he made 10 times more than he ever spent on the event and then some. So we're running it actually online still in light of COVID. It's going to be August 25th and 26th this month. So still have a few spots left, but it's always a fun experience. And we're a very open book. People ask us questions and, we don't call it a day until everything's answered. So excited to do it.
Awesome, man. Love it. Okay. So everybody knows Eric Cressey, author, coach, speaker, consultant, all those things. What's the hardest part of parenting?
Bedtime. I don't know.
Oh yeah. Yes.
I gotta ask, I actually want to ask you, because I have Andrew Millett was our physical therapist at our Massachusetts facility, and Matt Marizio is one of our long-term clients and one of my best friends. Andrew's got 2 kids. Matt's got 6 and I have 3. So we commiserate, and there's like a 3-way group text. Every time one of us has to do bath and bedtime by ourselves, it's like, emojis flying back and forth, like, oh, guys, pray for me. I don't know. I think there's a very different male-female dynamic where females, they feel it's very nurturing to do bath time. They love like books and everything. And at that time, I am just like, clean up your crap, stop arguing. I don't know. You don't need another glass of milk. Yes, you already brushed your teeth. I don't care that you left your stuffed animal downstairs. We're in this age of like procrastination where they always want to find a way to stay up later. Yep. So I don't find bedtime at all endearing. My wife loves it. Right. So I know that's insensitive. I get way more excited about like playing wiffle ball in the backyard and Connect Four and Sorry and stuff like that, and dropping them off at school and singing in the car. But bedtime, like, I could probably do without.
Yeah. Well, I hate to tell you, dude, my daughter's 10, so she's a couple years ahead of yours, and it's not any better. They drag it herself
to bed, right?
Well, like you wish, but then she like wants to pet the dog for the 10th time. Well, Finn needs me to say goodnight. I'm like, he's fine. Go to bed.
They know what they're doing.
Yes,
they're way smarter than us, which is astounding.
Absolutely. Okay. Last but not least, number 4. What's next for the Eric Cressey?
Win a World Series.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the biggest thing. I mean, that's anything less than that is not the goal in the world that we live in. So I want to be part of that process. And I think, obviously that's a very professional goal. I think on maybe a more objective side of things, I want to be a great teacher. I realize that a lot of my success, professionally is heavily predicated on our ability to scale our operations, whether that's at our 2 facilities, whether that's in, seminars, whether that's in, what I do with the Yankees and trying to make sure that, what we're implementing on the big league side of things is also impacting our work in high A or the Dominican Academy or whatever it is. So I can't be everywhere at once. So I really want to continue to refine, how I teach and how I scale, the expertise that I feel like I can share, and certainly keeping, sights on the fact that it's most important to be a good husband and a good dad as all that stuff goes on, because it is a lot of competing demands.
For sure. Well, Eric, man, so great to catch up with you. Hopefully it's not like a year between the next time that we do this, but
I know.
Where can my listeners find out more about you and all the great stuff that you're doing?
Yeah, for sure. EricCressey.com is kind of the hub for newsletter, blog, the podcast, which is heavily in the baseball world, but also has a lot of stuff in kind of the sports science, nutrition, et cetera realm. We're doing a home and home series, so we'll soon have a Mike Robertson interview up there.
Yes.
We're going to talk about how all he's doing impacts the baseball world as well. But that's, and it's Eric Cressey on Twitter and Instagram too. So
I love
thanks,
it.
Man.
I love it. Well, again, thanks so much for coming on, buddy. I really appreciate it.
No sweat. This is great. Good to catch up. Thanks for having me.
All right, my friend, that does it for this week's show with Eric. Really hope you enjoyed it. Like I said up top, just so cool seeing and hearing this guy's evolution over the years. Eric and I come from very similar upbringings. We were both very passionate about powerlifting. That obviously played a huge role in our development early on. It definitely influenced how we trained our clients and athletes. So to know that he, as well as myself, have evolved away from it to some degree, and it's not to say that we don't put an emphasis on strength training, because I know we both do, but maybe taking a step back and saying, okay, maximum strength has its role, but how much does any given client or athlete need to be successful? And I think we've all learned over the years that, hey, there's more to building a great athlete, a resilient athlete, than just lifting heavy all the time. So love the conversation. As you could tell, Eric's my guy. So I had a great time catching up with him. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you did, please do me one small favor. Wherever you consume podcasts, go there right now and subscribe so that you know each and every week when a new episode drops. Doesn't matter. It could be iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, Google Play, Amazon. Wherever you consume podcasts, hit the subscribe button so you know each and every week when a new episode drops. So my friend, as always, thank you so much for your support. Love and appreciate you. And we'll be back next week with our next episode. Take care.